Hey, so this video is going to cover how to access the Smarter Balance practice and training tests and from two different routes. The first route I'm going to show you is if you're at home. For some reason, if you're a kid who wants to practice this or you're a parent who wants to take a look at it, here's how you might do this. You go to Google and just type SBA training test. And then the first link that comes up, practice and training tests, SBAC portal, is a link. And then you click Student Interface, Practice and Training Tests. And then all the guest information is pre-logged in. And this is how you sign in. So it's not a real test. It's just you practicing. And then for grade, select your kid's grade, or select your grade, kids, and hit yes. Once you do that, you can choose which training test you want to work on. Now, the difference between a training test and a practice test, the training test is intended to teach someone how to use the site. The practice test is intended to give someone a possible sample of the actual items and get an idea for the actual content that's going to be on the test. Obviously not the exact content, but a feel for the types of content. Then the performance task is one of the other, it's the second section of the test students will be working on. So it's also intended, kind of like the practice test, to give students an idea of what the test will be about or what will be on the test. However, for what we're going to do here, I'm going to make this for students. And so for students, when you're at a school computer, what you should do is click this secure browser window. And when you double click a secure browser window, what that's going to do is totally take over your computer. And it says please sign in. You'll notice the guest stuff isn't there because you have to click here to go to the practice and training test site. So if you click that, then you'll see that all the guest stuff is filled in, and you can just hit sign in. Same deal as before. You click select grade, and you can select your grade and start. Now, one thing that might happen is that you might get a pop-up saying you need to close certain programs. Back, I believe, when you start to actually log into the site. In that case, to get out, you need to hit close secure browser up here in the top corner, and this will allow you to go back to the desktop, and then you'll be able to close whatever programs it didn't want you to have open. So let's go back into secure browser. Practice and training test site. Assuming there's no problems when we sign in, we sign in. Guest, we select our grade, and then hit yes. What we're going to be working on in this case are the training tests. The focus of this video is not on the practice tests themselves, but instead learning how to use the actual tools available on the test site. And so when we go to the training test, we're going to start with the math one. I would recommend leaving all these defaulted because these would give you the most accurate experience that the average student is going to have unless they're having certain accommodations provided to them on the test. So if you hit select and move on, you can see that things that have been selected, great, yes, start my test. And then I'd make a point of reading directions as they show up. So you can click the question mark button at any point to access the help menu. And you'll notice this is the help menu that pops up. And you can get all sorts of information about the testing site, test rules, blah, blah, blah. All sorts of information is available to you there. Assuming you feel like you're ready to go, begin test now. And we'll begin the test. And the idea here is for students to learn how to use the tools that are part of the test. And at any point, if you need to get out, if you're like, oh my gosh, my computer is taking over, how do I get out of it? The way you get out of this training test is by hitting the pause button and then by hitting yes. This will take you back to the place where you can close that secure browser and get back to your desktop. So in a second, we're going to figure out how do you actually get back to the training test and how do you use those actual tools. Okay, so now that we're back at the practice and training test login, we're going to sign in. And then we're going to select a grade. And for this one, I'm going to be using grade 7. This is the first grade that calculators can be used on the test. So we hit yes. We're going to start with the math training test. And we're going to go over a few basic tools that are used in the math training test. The tools in the math training test are a little trickier than the language arts one. English language arts. Yes, start my test. Begin test now. We've already gone through this. So here are some things to cover. And the first one is sometimes students will have audio given to them as part of the test. And so this button up here, this little sprocket tool, That allows them to adjust the volume of the test. Students will have headphones in the computer lab, but you might want to adjust the volume based on your preferences. One of the most important things about the math test is these 3 lines right here. If one were to hit these 3 lines, they get a tutorial. If they click the tutorial, they get an example video showing how to do a problem like this. I would recommend watching this tutorial for every step you go through. Beyond that, students have a notepad where they can write notes themselves and save those notes, and those notes will be associated with those questions. Well, why would you want to save notes and associate them with a question? Are you just going to answer and move on? Well, what you can do is mark a problem for review. And notice how now, up here in this top corner, questions 1 is marked. This allows a student to move on and then use this to navigate back to review questions that they need to finish up later. So I need to add some points and connect a line. Obviously, I'm not showing you how to do this problem the right way, but the system won't let you move on until you submit some sort of answer. And we'll hit next. Okay, in this question, they want to write an expression. So what someone could do is type in some numbers, and you can actually use a keyboard as well. 2 important buttons here are this one right here. This allows a student to create a fraction. They would just click the field they want to fill in for the numerator and denominator respectively, and then they could move on. So, done. I've made a fraction. Also, I can make an exponent, which if I click this button, I have to enter a number first, such as backspace. Let's enter a number first. First we enter the number, then we enter the exponent, and it creates an exponent. We can make an exponent of an exponent. I'm not sure we're there yet though. Anytime we hit backspace, backspace, and backspace, notice how the box shrinks and we go back to entering just regular old numbers. In this case, the H key stands for a variable. So if you want to add a variable, click the H key. In the event there's more than one variable will be provided. The only thing that's tricky for students sometimes also is that on a keyboard, if you notice like on a 10 key, the symbol for multiply or times is this asterisk right here. And students can delete answers or can redo and undo things that they have done. They can also move the cursor back and forth with these arrow keys, as well as the arrow keys on the keyboard. The other tool students have available to them is a calculator. So up here, they can click calculator. And in this case, I have it set up for a 7th grade test, which defaults to a scientific calculator. These are similar buttons that students would see on an average scientific calculator. The buttons can be inputted through the 10 key, through the keys on the top of the keyboard, or they can input buttons manually through mouse clicking. Another feature that people might find useful is the zoom in and zoom out feature. So if students zoom out, this is as far out as a zoom, but students can zoom in to get a closer look, and then they can zoom out. As we move on, there are fields where students must enter numbers. These are gibberish numbers. I am not by any means trying to teach how to do this test the right way, just how to enter in the fields. Notice that if you don't answer all the questions, it prompts you to fill in the blank for every field. So I'm going to select some answers at random here. This kind of question, it says to ordered pairs are shown on the coordinate grid. Drag each ordered pair and drop it. Well, if I wasn't sure how to do this, I could go back and hit that tutorial button. The tutorial button will show how to do this test. I could also make a note in the notepad, mark review, just like I can with every question. But the way to do this essentially is to click this little coordinate and drag it to a place in the grid. Once they are all dragged on, I can then move on to the next question. Here are true-false questions. No idea if those are right answers. I'm going to select more answers. And we'll keep moving on. Select the height of the liquid in the prism. Notice that every mouse click fills the prism with certain levels of liquid. The student would need to click the mouse in the right spot. Again, the tutorial button is a great tool to use because it shows the student exactly how to do this. I've answered all the questions in the test. This is a similar thing a student will see when they're done. So I say OK. Now I go back and I check my answers. This would be a good time to hit those questions. Oh, question 1 is marked. OK, cool. All right, I'm going to unmark this review item. I feel like I'm done with the test. Now I can hit the End Test button. When the End Test button is hit, You reach the end of the test, click yes to continue to the next page, no to keep working on your test, I'm ready to be done, yes, and I'm done. Shows the answers that the student submitted, not the right answers. And then it says, are you sure you want to submit the test? Yeah. And then in this case, they would log out because there's no more training tests. We'll take a look at the ELA test as well. It's much more simple than the math in terms of the tools it uses. So on the training test, begin. I wouldn't recommend changing any of the defaults unless you know for certain the student will be requiring some sort of accommodations. And you start the test. And then you need to do a sound check. So you click on the icon. Here's lovely piano music. Hit yes. Begin test now. Then it brings you into that secure browser. In this case, this is a pretty simple open-ended response question. So student enters in open-ended response and next. Notice that there's also the same the same 3 bars for all of these questions. In this case, there were no options available. However, for this question, there was a tutorial available. This tutorial would show how to answer a question like this. It wouldn't give the right answer, but it would show an example of how to do it. Also, these questions can be marked for review, or a student could write themselves a note, save it, and they could take a look at it when they review their notes later on. So similar deal here. There's a tutorial, notepad, marked for review, and these 3 questions. One thing that students might miss that's really beneficial is any word that has these very faint gray dots above it. And one thing that might influence whether or not a student can see those gray dots is whether or not their monitor is calibrated correctly. So students, it's a good idea to take a look at the side buttons on your monitor, hit the top button along the side, then hit the next button down that's lined up with brightness and contrast, and make sure that both the brightness and contrast are at 50 and 50. So by hitting this 3rd button down that has the arrow keys side to side, you can select which one you're going to be modifying. In this case, brightness is up at 100. I'm going to use the down arrow to bring brightness down to 50. And what that allows me to do is make sure that everything will show up on the screen exactly as it's supposed to. Make sure everything's at 50-50 when you take this test, so that way you don't miss anything that's on the screen. Now, if I click the narrator, it gives an example or a definition for what that word means. This idea is that if you're reading, you don't know the word, well, hopefully they give a definition of what that word means. So students can also zoom in, students can zoom out. I have to enter some sort of text here, and I can move on. In this case, just have to click to select the answers right here. Hit next. There's also these tools. I can also do a strike through. A strike through allows me to eliminate answers. And I can hit next. In this case, this student would have to listen to a presentation.
In the novel Around the World in 80...
So the student listens rather than reads, and then has to answer some questions based on what they listened to. So let's say the student feels like they're ready to answer some questions. What they can do is start by using the strike through button to eliminate the answers that you know aren't right. Now wait, what if I check that and then I realize, oh man, that is the right answer? All I have to do is right click, right where it says on the strike through, and by right clicking I can undo the strike through. Now sometimes that right clicking doesn't work for some reason, and if the right clicking isn't working to undo the strike through, then you just click the strike through again and it undoes itself. It was hard for me to tell when and where that setting changed, but either through right clicking the strike through or clicking it again, it adds or removes the strike through. So we answer one, we move on. In this case, there are multiple things to select. We answer one, move on. Notice that there's a notepad tutorial, how to do this question, move on. The tutorial function is really important to use on almost every question because it shows you exactly what to do for that question. If you feel like you're in doubt at all on how to do that question they're asking you to do, make sure to hit the 3 bars and look for the tutorial button. At this point, I'm done. Hit end test. Same deal. I can go back and review questions I had marked as for review, take a look at any notes I made for that. Once I feel like I'm totally ready to move on, hit yes, submit test, be sure, yeah, let's do it, because it doesn't matter, it's just a training test anyways. Then we log out, and we're all done. So that's a basic overview.